This video is brought to you by Captivating History. Gladiatorial games started in Rome sometime around 264 BCE. At first, the matches were pretty low-key, and they were conducted as funeral rites for affluent Roman citizens. Graveside human sacrifice had become too barbaric for Roman sensibilities, and allowing slaves to fight each other to the death seemed more sportsmanlike. These early gladiators were no more than slaves or criminals brought in for the event, and they were quite different from the trained gladiators in years to come. The gladiatorial games hit their peak from the 1st century BCE to the 2nd century CE, and by this time, gladiators were highly trained combatants. So let's take a closer look at the life of these ferocious entertainers. While most gladiators were slaves and captives selected for their strength, size, or fighting prowess, free men could also sign up to become gladiators. Probably tempted by the prizes and the fame, as well as the potential for financial gain, people would volunteer themselves to a gladiator school. Gladiators were allowed to keep any gifts and cash prizes they won through combat, and if the display were particularly spectacular, they would be awarded a symbolic laurel wreath. Some emperors were also known to try their hand at gladiatorial combat, although the odds were obviously stacked in their favor. Female gladiators, known as gladiatrix, were rare, but they did exist. Little is known about them, so we must rely on the speculation of historians for information on these fearsome women. They probably underwent similar training to their male counterparts and enjoyed the same accolades. Some scholars believe that all gladiatrices were slaves, while others maintain that free women could also sign up. We do know that they fought bare-chested, but were not necessarily seen to be erotic. It appears to be that they were more of a novelty act, and the practice of female fighters did not last as long as the male gladiatorial games. There were more than 100 gladiator schools across the Roman Empire, and they served as both a prison and a training ground for gladiators. New recruits would be given a physical and medical assessment to be deemed fit enough to withstand the rigorous training and lifestyle. The assessment was also used to determine what fighting style would best suit the recruit. There were many distinctive types of gladiatorial fighters, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. There was also the matter of aesthetics, as Roman audiences evidently preferred to see handsome men and women fight to the death. The various kinds of gladiators were distinctive in their appearance in the arena, from ones sporting tridents and a noose to ones that only had a spear to defend themselves. All the gladiatorial types had names and distinct styles of armor, weapons, and fighting. Thrax fighters wore high-crested helmets, had small square shields, and fought with a short dagger, while the MURMILLO fought with a Roman sword and carried a rectangular shield. They wore large helmets sporting a crest of horsehair with a grill face visor, shin guards, and protected their sword arm with a full arm guard made of leather, metal, or chain mail. The RETIARIUS were known as the fishermen, as these lightly armored gladiators carried nets and a trident. EQUITES entered the arena on horseback, although they dismounted to fight. Machaerus fought with two swords, and Essidari fought in chariots. These distinct types of gladiators had well-known strengths and weaknesses, and many were vulnerable to another specific gladiator type. The styled dress of the gladiators meant that the audience, seeing them enter the arena, could begin to speculate who the winner might be from the way the gladiators were armed. Fighters in heavy armor afforded more protection, but were slow to move about, while those without much protection were nimble and could avoid blows easier. Usually, fighters of two unique styles were pitted against each other, the most common pairing being MURMILLO and Thrax. Many of these gladiator types stem from the fighting styles of peoples conquered by the Romans. Subsequently, these styles would fall out of fashion if the people they depicted became assimilated into the Roman Empire. Once the men were accepted into gladiator school and assigned a fighting style, they would have to complete basic training before competing in combat. Trainers were often ex-gladiators who specialized in a specific kind of fighting. The training was as hard as the fight itself, and gladiators had to train every day. New recruits were shackled and closely guarded, although this eased up for established fighters. The time and money put into preparing a gladiator meant that they were usually well looked after. They were given plenty of food, the best medical treatment of the time, regular massages, and hot or cold baths. Good hygiene in the barracks was essential to stop the spread of diseases. In all, the life of a gladiator was probably better than most lower-class Roman citizens, No wonder many volunteered themselves. The daily life of a gladiator started early. They would be let out of their cells at dawn and given the first of their 3 daily meals. They would usually be kept in shackles unless they were training, and they were not allowed to talk during mealtimes. They were very well fed, as they had to keep up their strength for training and combat. The training was rigorous and even included lessons on how to die. It was expected that gladiators would die with dignity and honor, even extending their necks if the audience decreed that they should be finished off. New gladiators were known as novicius, and if a gladiator survived his first fight, he would be known as veterani. A surprising way a gladiator could gain an advantage over an opponent was to be left-handed. Left-handed fighters trained to fight right-handers would be at a distinct advantage when facing an opponent unaccustomed to being attacked from this angle. Many epitaphs and graffiti commented upon this quality in successful gladiators. Gladiators were usually only expected to fight in the arena 3 to 5 times a year, assuming they survived, although some did fight more often than this. As they were expensive commodities, nobody involved in the sport wanted them to die. Should a gladiator die, trainers could charge the sponsor of an event up to 100 times the value of the surviving fighter. If the sponsor allowed a gladiator to be killed, it was seen as a display of their generosity. An appealing aspect of gladiatorial life was the fame that came with it. Gladiators were the rock stars of the time, as evidenced by the graffiti discovered on walls in Pompeii, which includes comments such as "Celitus, suspirium puellarum." Celitus makes the girl swoon. Aside from the tombstones of the gladiators themselves, graffiti has been a valuable resource in allowing historians to piece together the achievements and careers of individual fighters. One graffiti sequence records the beginning bouts of a gladiator called Marcus Antyllus, speculated to be a free man due to his name. In his first fight, he took down a veterani named Hilarius, who had won the distinction of receiving a wreath 13 times previously. Antyllus received a wreath for that bout, and in his next fight he defeated Lucius Raecius Felix, who had himself won 12 previous wreaths. These fights must have been exciting to watch, as the losing fighters were both granted a reprieve. A typical image of gladiator games is the audience holding out their thumbs, either up or down. Many mosaics from across the Roman Empire depict the victorious gladiator standing over his opponent, poised to strike, should the crowd demand it. While it was ultimately the decision of the event's sponsor to determine the fighter's fate, he usually went with the prevailing feeling of the spectators. Many historians now think that the traditional view that a thumbs down meant death is incorrect, and this gesture may have been the call for the combatant to be spared. It seems that the more often you fought, the greater your chance of being saved if you were defeated. Many gladiators built up a loyal fan base, much like sports personalities today. Gladiatorial barracks, where the fighters spent most of their time, were diverse in members and constantly fluctuating. Old members would die or retire, and new members were recruited. In larger barracks, men with the same fighting style would train together and form bonds with each other. The group of gladiators that a fallen fighter belonged to would arrange for his funeral, furnish his tombstone, and even provide financial support for his family. It must have been a frequent occurrence to meet a friend in the arena and still have to fight them to the death. A Greek physician by the name of Claudius Galen gives a stark description of a veteran gladiator. Galen had studied at medical school in Alexandria before moving to Rome, and at the age of 28, he became the surgeon to a gladiatorial school. He implied that ex-gladiators suffer from a kind of post-traumatic stress and described their poor health in retirement. Some die shortly after. Others live a little longer, but never reach an old age. If they were lucky enough to survive to retirement age, most gladiators could not enjoy their wealth and newfound freedom. Their bodies, enfeebled by the jolts they had received, are predisposed to become sick on the least provocation. Their eyes, ordinarily sunken, readily become the seat of fluxions. Their teeth, so readily injured, fall out. With muscles and tendons frequently torn, their articulation become incapable of resisting strain and readily dislocate. From the standpoint of health, no condition is more wretched. Galen also described their physicality. Many who have been perfectly proportioned fall into the hands of trainers who develop them beyond measure, overload them with flesh and blood, and make them just the opposite, a disfigured countenance hideous to look upon. limbs broken or dislocated and eyes gouged out of sockets. When they no longer exercise their profession, they lose sensation, the limbs become dislocated, and, as I have said, they become completely deformed. So, it seems the rock and roll lifestyle of the gladiators took its toll on their minds and bodies. This may be why many retired gladiators chose to stay at the schools, become trainers, or enlist in the Roman army, instead of attempting to reintegrate with society. Although a gladiator could retire after 5 years, it seemed that many never made it past the age of 30. Although we can only rely on the evidence we have, it is plausible to assume that some lucky fellows managed to retire in luxury and enjoy their winnings and kudos. In 1993, a gladiator cemetery was uncovered in Turkey. It was essentially a mass grave containing the bones of around 70 men, located 300 meters from the arena in which they had fought. Inscriptions found on tombstones indicate that some of the gladiators had survived 136 fights. The bones were found to be from men aged 20 to 30, with one woman discovered amongst them, and an older man of 55 who is thought to have been a retired gladiator who had become a trainer. Studies of the bones suggested that these men had fought barefoot rather than in sandals, and healed wounds confirmed the excellent medical attention that these fighters received. The life of a gladiator was both sensational and barbaric, luxurious and torturous, but above all, it was usually short. To learn more about Roman gladiators, check out our book, The Roman Games, a captivating guide to the gladiators, chariot races, and games in ancient Rome. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.